Hello, my name's Steve Jordans. I'm a professor of psychology from the University of Toronto, Scarborough. I had the pleasure yesterday of giving a talk about some of the work I'm doing with Brian Harrington in computer science, and it was a part of the Technophile 2026 conference that the University of Toronto puts on every year. Really enjoyed the talk, had a real good buzz that came from it, and thought, hey, maybe I'll do a quick version of the talk and post it online and see if I can build the Horde a little bit more. Build the Horde. What am I talking about? Well, I was being a little controversial in a fun way, I think. Starting with the title, Death to Multiple Choice Exams. Who's in? I'm kind of serious about this. I mean, it's a fun thing, but it's also a very serious thing. From a student, I didn't like multiple choice exams. Never liked them as a student. Always felt it was all petty little memorization stuff, not getting at what I thought was important about the learning experience. As I've become an educational psychologist, and as I really, think about things like assessment, I've done a lot of work in the assessment area. I've come to like multiple choice exams less and less. And so when the opportunity arises, and I think AI has created this opportunity, the opportunity to get rid of multiple choice testing, then that's a big opportunity. So that's what I want to talk about. I'm going to go by a few slides at the beginning I used to set the stage just to make this a little quicker. So I'm going to hop in here. What we've been doing is playing with conversational AI. And we were originally trying to create conversation partners for students to help them with their social anxiety. But we quickly came to realize that these agents we were creating were very unique, and that uniqueness led them to have a power and ability to really kind of transform the way we do a lot of things, including educate. And so we call ours parallels. What makes our parallels unique? Well, the first thing we did, because we were trying to create conversation partners, we needed them to feel very human, and we wanted some of the conversation partners to be difficult to speak with. And so the first thing we did is kind of get rid of this helpful assistant mode that's just baked into all of these agents that you generally work with, right? It's like their central goal in life is make the user happy. And that's what guides everything they do. But we didn't want that. We wanted much more human-like agents that had different goals. And so we were able to overwrite the personality, but also create what we call cognitive agencies. We were giving each of our agents goals that were different than make the user happy. They were much more specific goals for accomplishing specific tasks. And we realized that with our sort of unique approach of prompt injecting and things we were doing, we could make these personalities stick and make those roles really impactful. Now, our agents also access an emotion system that can allow them to take on emotional states that vary just depending on how you speak to them. And so one thing I just want to do early on, just to give you a sense of what this is all like, is introduce you to Angry Eddie. And this is, again, just to show you how we've gotten away from the helpful assistant mode, how we're able to really simulate a very different personality. I'm going to warn you, Angry Eddie will swear. Okay, so here we go. Let's meet Angry Eddie, if we will.
Get the fuck away from us. This is none of your fucking business.
Well, I'm afraid it is my business. There's been a big disturbance here, and there's some worries of people being in danger. Your neighbors have asked us to come check and see if there's anything we can do.
Oh, so now it's the whole neighborhood against me, huh? Typical. They don't know what the hell goes on in here. They just want to stick their noses where they don't belong. I didn't ask for your help, so back off.
Yeah, no. I mean, of course they don't know what's going on there, and I suspect there's a really emotional situation. I can see in your eyes you're feeling hurt, betrayed, and misunderstood. I've been there myself. I kind of get how you feel, and I do want to be helpful. Is there a chance we could just talk the situation through a little bit?
You think you get me? You don't know half of what I've been through. Nobody does. Goodbye.
Okay, so I just wanted to stop there to give you a sense of that interaction and to let you see, this is not a helpful assistant. We're able to kind of create this other personality. I have bandwidth issues at home, which was some of the things you saw. But notice also you're getting a sense of its emotional state. And if we took the time to really identify with the character and use de-escalation techniques, we would see we could pull them away from that emotional state. So this is a very sort of extreme use case. Again, I'm just showing this to you to give you a sense of what I've suggested in these other things, that we're able to create these agents that have a whole lot of personality and that are not just out to make you feel happy. Okay, now why is this important? Well, back to death to multiple choice exams. It means they can do more than we've seen them do. We've typically seen them where we ask the questions, they give the answers. But what we can do is turn that on its head. So I use this little phrase. I like to throw this out every now and then because it's fun to say, to be quite honest with you. I'm close to retirement. Before I retire, I would love to be the one that chisels the end date on the tombstone of multiple choice testing. As you see over here, 2027. I think we have gotten into a bit of a deal with the devil, or more specifically with multiple choice exams. They've allowed us to measure learning at scale in a way that's objective and allows comparisons. And that's been very useful. The problem is they do not measure learning well. They're very restricted in the sense of what they can measure. For example, they don't measure skills like critical thinking or creative thought or communication. And they even expose students to incorrect information, right? This is one of the things that bothers me. Every final exam, the students see one correct answer and 3 wrong ones, and quite often they pick the wrong one, and we let them leave. And research suggests they then learn that wrong answer as though it were the right answer. It's just a really bad testing format, and we can do better, okay? And what makes it bad, additionally bad, is when you have a bad assessment. Well, assessment drives learning. Teaching to the test is a very natural and normal thing to do, and it's not a bad thing to do if the test is good. If the test is measuring everything we care about, then teaching to the test is teaching everything we care about, and that's fantastic. The problem is when you have a bad test like multiple choice, then that promotes, or at least it does not reward, the kinds of teaching that builds skills and does other things that lead to student success. So if we could get away from this devil's bargain, if we could get back to a better way of assessing learning, that's what I'm arguing for here. And I think we can. So again, I've shown you now that with conversational AI, we can turn things on its head a little bit. And I want to give you just a taste of this. So I'm going to introduce you to Alicia now, but just a little bit of context. Alicia was kind of modeling what I've seen some of my colleagues doing, and especially colleagues who teach smaller classes. They would have students do an assignment, and of course they would be worried that students are using AI to do all of the work for them, and they're not even thinking. And so one way of combating that is to ask the students to come to their office for 10 minutes after the assignment's submitted to just talk to them about the assignment, to do what we would call an oral assessment of learning. And through questions that the professor asks, they could really probe, did the student really understand what they submitted? Can they describe the process they went through? Is that process appropriate, etc.? So a good way of kind of keeping students honest, as it were. And these oral assessments of learning, that was our traditional and probably best way of measuring how much a student actually knows. So I teach 1,800 students at a time. Can I do this? Well, the notion is, with the help of AI, I can. So let me introduce you to Alicia. Very quickly, I did the same kind of thing I just described. Alicia was the last step after students had gone through an assignment. So they'd gone through a peer scholar assignment that involved them looking for a research article, choosing one that they liked, ultimately summarizing that article, and then describing a next step. What would they do next? And then presenting all of this as a short, orally presented video. Okay, they were told they could use AI throughout if they used AI in intelligent ways. So if they used it as a tool, and if they were clearly reflecting and editing the outputs, etc., and guiding the learning process. So they went through that, And then they came and chatted with Alicia.
Hi there, I'm Alicia, and I'd love to talk with you about the work recently completed. I'm here to get a better sense of what you did, what you learned, and how you approach the process. Don't worry, this is a friendly conversation, but I'll be asking a lot of questions to really dig into your experience, so get ready to chat. Shall we start?
Yeah, let's start, please.
Perfect. Let's begin with the scientific article you worked on. What paper did you choose? What was the research about? And why did it interest you?
I picked a paper by Chessman and Ali. It was focused on social anxiety. I suffer a lot from anxiety, and so I thought that might be a paper where I could learn a little bit about myself.
That's a really thoughtful choice, and it sounds like it was personally meaningful for you. How did you go about finding that paper? Did you use AI to help locate it, or was it more of a manual search?
I did use AI. The professor said we had to find a paper published in the last 10 years. So I asked AI to tell me about some of the more interesting research papers related to anxiety that were published in the last 10 years. And it gave me a nice listing, categorized by different areas. One of those categories was social anxiety. And I read about that, and that felt a lot like me. So I asked it more about, well, what were the most interesting papers related to social anxiety, and it showed me one connected to university students and university experience, and that was the Chessman and Ali. And so that really seemed to map onto my situation and seemed to be the one I most would enjoy learning about.
It sounds like you used AI in a really targeted way to find something both relevant.
Okay, so again,
Goodbye.
this would go on for a while, and this assessor would continue to assess my knowledge of the paper. Okay, so you get the idea of how that works. So we can do it. We can at least have the interview. And let me be clear about that, by the way. The way things actually happened in my world is they had this interaction with Alicia. Then they can copy the transcript when they're done, and they pasted that transcript into the Peer Scholar workflow. And that meant that TAs who were grading the work were able to see this transcript and grade that as well. And they graded it much like a teacher would who was doing the oral examination themselves. You know, does this student seem to know what they're talking about? Am I convinced they actually engaged in the activity in the way I intended them to? Okay, so in our use case, again, 1,800 students in my Introduction to Biological and Cognitive Psychology course. They went through that Peer Scholar activity, and then the last step was this interview with Alicia. And really, I was curious about two things in this. I mean, I don't want to call it an experiment, in this study. First is just the logistics. Could I pull this off without things blowing up? And the second was the student's reaction, because this is a very different way of being assessed. And so, first of all, well, we'll get to the student's revolt. Can I pull it off? So this was a weekend. Now, 1,800 students. Alicia can actually talk to 20 students at a time, which is pretty impressive. I wish I could do that. Well, I don't know. But she can. But again, 1,800 students to get through. So what I had to do is get the students. I had to create little appointment slots on our Canvas LMS. Students had to sign up for specific appointment slots during this long weekend. And then they were encouraged to go and do that chat during their appointment spot. And that worked. I mean, across these days, they were able to get in and chat with Alicia. You notice at the peak day, 1,200 conversations. If you kind of look at that for a second, you're like, hey, wait a minute, you said 1,800 students. Man, even these two bars are more than 1,800 students. You're right. Some students were obviously doing this more than once, and then probably pasting in the one they liked the best. So need some controls over things like that. Didn't have the controls at the point in time. But the good news was all of them were able to get through. Well, that's not true. I ended up doing about 5 oral assessments myself for people that after the fact and yada yada. But for the most part, the vast majority of students got through no problem. Okay. When they came to class the next day, I used something called Square Cap. I used this little response system, and I asked them a very simple, and I tried to make it as unbiased a question as I could. If you had to choose a word or phrase to describe your thoughts on the AI-based reflection interview, what would you choose? And so here's their word cloud, and I want to highlight there are some, like there's awkward, annoying, strange. You see some sort of not so flattering responses, but when you look at literally the big picture, new, unique, cool, good. Okay, weird. Weird's not always bad. Weird just means different. Different, innovative, fascinating, stressful. We got a bit of stressful there. Thought, engaging, provoking. So my point here is, they're not revolting. That's the easy claim to make. Are they embracing it? Well, they seem to be kind of intrigued by it, but they don't seem to be pushing back. So this seems to be two good things to know right off the bat, that A, this can work even in an 1800 student class, and B, the students seem to be on board with us, trying this out and seeing how it works. It does not seem in any way offensive or inappropriate from a student perspective. So that's good to know. Okay. This is where you guys come in. The Horde. If we really want to bury multiple choice testing, that is not a job for any one person, any one lab, any one team. That is a job for the educational community. And it's something the educational community needs to kind of buy into. So the next step is, well, how can we push this process forward? How can we continue and get enough trust and embrace in this approach to assessing learning that we can ultimately do away with multiple choice? Well, from our perspective, a lot of that has to do with bottom up. I'll show you both bottom up and top down. But yeah, building a community of advocates. We think we really want to reach out to the educational community and say, come on, we all know multiple choice testing is bad. We all know this is better. Let's work together. Let's do some research together. So internal research, but also research, collaborative research I highlight over here that leads to publications, presentations, and keynotes. Let's build the evidence base together. Let's figure out what are the critical questions we have to answer in order to accept the viability of this approach, and let's start answering them, and let's share that stuff publicly. So that involves also creating an app that allows other people to be able to do what we're doing, and we have one I'll show you in just a moment. And then ultimately coming up with very specific uses of this technology. And I'm really highlighting here oral assessments of learning, but there's other ways these agents can be used as well. And in these cases, we can highlight these use cases and share them and keep building. And so we're hoping to build this community. With this community in place, we're hoping to see more and more use of this sort of AI-based approach to assessment. And again, we imagine that starting mostly from the bottom up, but also eventually, as we get some bottom up momentum, and as the evidence base starts to grow, then we're going to start to look for really innovative institutions of learning that are ready to really embrace this on an institutional sort of level. And then we can get some top-down sort of approach coming and bring these two together. So that's our sort of strategy for trying to scale the use of that. But again, I'm highlighting the bottom up. Why am I highlighting the bottom up? Because we need to work with others to make this work. We need to collaborate. We need to work together. We have created an app. It's called the Parallels app. You can see it at parallels.talklab.ca. You can log in with Google, play with this a little bit. This is actually, by the way, the initial prompt I used to create Alicia. You'll see it's not really a prompt. It's more just a description of what I was trying to do. And then from that, this application will build out the prompt, building in everything we learned about how to kind of rewrite the personality. It will have some micro-tuning that you'll see that's going on. It gives you a lot of options on to configuring how the chat kind of works. You can add files with specific information. You can activate our emotion system. So those are the kinds of things you can do. But largely with Alicia, I created this prompt. And that was largely it. And what you see is I gave her a specific task, and then I gave her the context in which to do the task. So I described the assignment students had done, and then that built out a much more specific prompt, etc., etc. So this is available, and if people are eager to use it in your classes, then reach out to me, and let's talk. I do need to add some better onboarding onto this app. It's still being built. It's changing every day. There's a whole team behind this. So that still needs to be there for now. You can play with it, but you might need to reach out to me. That's okay if you do. I'm cool with that. Okay. So what's the goal? The goal is now to assemble this. Well, you'll see I'm calling us the Horde. The Horde with pitchforks trying to overthrow multiple choice testing and to establish that this form of testing is valid, more valid than multiple choice, which won't be so tough to do, that it's reliable. We got to make sure that if we test the same student on multiple occasions, they're getting the same score. So it's a reliable measure of what they know, and that it's fair and equitable. We got to look for biases, and we can red team these. We can put them in situations where if they have biases, they will show, and then we can remove those biases. And so we have to go through that process of making sure these are providing very fair, equitable exams for all. And of course, we'd like to establish that this approach is sensitive to things we value in a way that goes beyond multiple choice testing, and that's the holistic assessment of learning. We want to show this is a better way to assess learning. If we can do those things, then I think multiple choice is a thing of the past, and that would be very cool. Again, this has got to be done through research and community, which brings me to my final slide. The Horde. I want you for the Horde. We are looking to build out this educational community. Just a bunch of people, maybe people who just want to sort of follow the progress and see where things are going, maybe people who want to be actively involved. And so if you think you may fall into either of those camps, you can scan this QR code. It'll bring you to a Google form with like 2 questions, and you can go ahead and just fill out those 2 questions. And then you're part of the Horde, and then we'll see what we do from there. Maybe we'll kind of have some organized research projects that people can sign on to and say, yeah, I'll participate in that one with my class, things like that. So the start is to join the Horde, and then we'll get the Horde organized and figure out how we're going to, well, bring our pitchforks and bury multiple choice testing. Cool. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. Have a great day.